The quantum encryption hit the Galactic Confederation's primary communication hub like a digital tsunami. Dr. Zora Vex watched in stunned silence as layers of security protocols, systems that had taken centuries to develop, dissolved like frost under a plasma torch. Her colleagues froze. The massive holographic displays that dominated the central observation chamber flickered with a cascade of data streams, each more incomprehensible than the last. Senior analyst Krultok, a veteran of 15 interstellar conflicts, went pale, his 4 eyes blinking in rapid, unsynchronized succession. "That's impossible," he whispered. But it was happening. The transmission wasn't just breaking through. It was conducting a surgical strike of information that defied every known principle of digital communication. Firewalls that had repelled countless cyber attacks crumbled. Quantum encryption keys that would take most civilizations millennia to crack were being unraveled in microseconds. Dr. Vex's hands moved almost independently, her neural interface dancing across holographic controls. She was a xenohistorian, not a communication specialist, but something about this transmission demanded her immediate attention. Her specialty was studying first contact scenarios, and this was unlike anything in the historical archives. A single line of text materialized at the center of the primary display. Transmission, Earth Historical Archives. Classification, Comprehensive Species Profile. Warning: contents will fundamentally alter your understanding of intelligent life. The text pulsed with an almost living quality, each character seeming to vibrate with potential energy. Around her, the massive communication hub had gone completely silent. Hundreds of specialists, representatives from dozens of galactic species, stood transfixed. Verify source, commanded Admiral Zilura, her crystalline exoskeleton catching the harsh light of the communication arrays. But verification was unnecessary. The transmission was authentic in a way that defied traditional authentication. It wasn't just data, it was a statement. A challenge. Dr. Vex knew humanity was a relatively new species in galactic terms. Discovered barely a century ago, they had been categorized as a developing civilization, a polite diplomatic term that essentially meant not yet worth serious consideration. Most advanced species regarded humans with a mixture of condescension and mild curiosity. They were seen as promising, but ultimately insignificant. This transmission was about to change everything. The first file began to unfold. It wasn't a simple historical document. It was a meticulously constructed narrative, part historical record, part philosophical treatise, part something else entirely. Each segment was layered with multiple levels of meaning, encrypted not just with mathematical codes, but with contextual and cultural references that would take months, perhaps years to fully decode. "It's a handbook," Dr. Vex murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. A handbook of impossible victories. The transmission continued to pour through. Preliminary scans suggested the total data volume was astronomical, equivalent to the collected historical records of 3 major galactic civilizations. Yet it was being transmitted with such efficiency that the entire package would be received in mere minutes. Krultok approached Dr. Vex, his tentacular appendages trembling slightly. "You're the foremost expert on emerging civilizations," he said. "What do you make of this?" Before she could respond, another layer of the transmission activated. Holographic displays throughout the chamber transformed, showing fragments of human history, not the sanitized diplomatic versions found in standard galactic archives, but raw, unfiltered moments of human experience. A scene of early space exploration, primitive rockets breaking through Earth's atmosphere, grainy footage of humans walking on their moon, a technological achievement that seemed laughably simple by current galactic standards. Yet there was something in those images, a quality of determination, of absolute, unreasonable hope. Another fragment, humans responding to a global pandemic, not with panic, but with unprecedented global cooperation. Scientists sharing research in real time. Engineers rapidly developing solutions. Communities supporting one another against what seemed like insurmountable odds. They're showing us who they are, Dr. Vex realized. Not just their achievements, their essence. The transmission was more than a historical document. It was a declaration, a message to the galaxy that humanity was not what they had been assumed to be. Not a young, developing species to be patronized, but something else entirely. Something dangerous. Something magnificent. The first encrypted file of the transmission began to unspool like a living narrative, challenging everything Dr. Zora Vex thought she knew about survival and innovation. The Martian Uprising. 2 words that would redefine the concept of human resilience. The holographic display shifted, reconstructing a 3-dimensional landscape of Mars as it existed in the mid-22nd century. This wasn't the sanitized historical record found in standard galactic archives. This was raw, unfiltered reality, a testament to human survival that bordered on the miraculous. In the year 2137, the first permanent human settlement on Mars found itself in what any rational species would consider a no-win scenario. Established as a research and mining outpost, the colony of New Ares had been cut off from Earth following a catastrophic series of solar storms that decimated long-range communication and supply networks. Their primary life support systems were failing. Resource depletion was imminent. External scans showed their situation was hopeless. Most species would have simply accepted extinction. Humans did something else entirely. Dr. Vex watched as the transmission revealed the colony's response. It wasn't a single brilliant solution, but a cascading series of impossible innovations. Led by Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a systems engineer who would later be recognized as one of the most brilliant minds in human history, the colonists began a systematic reimagining of their entire existence. The first breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A hydroponic specialist named Marcus Chen discovered a way to genetically modify existing plant strains, creating hybrid organisms that could survive in Mars' harsh environment with minimal resources. Where traditional agricultural science saw impossible challenges, Chen saw opportunities. But genetic modification was just the beginning. The colony's power systems were failing. Instead of accepting their fate, the engineers began to completely redesign their entire energy infrastructure. They cannibalized every non-essential piece of equipment, transforming mining drills, communication arrays, and even personal electronic devices into a networked power generation system. Look at the adaptation, Krultok muttered beside Dr. Vex, his 4 eyes wide with a mixture of horror and fascination. They're treating their entire colony like a living organism. And he was right. The humans weren't just surviving. They were evolving in real time. The transmission showed how they restructured their entire social system. Traditional hierarchies dissolved. Every colonist became a critical component of survival. The station's commander, a woman named Sarah Thompson, implemented a radical system of collective decision-making. Every person, regardless of their official role, was empowered to contribute solutions. A maintenance worker's offhand comment about thermodynamics led to a breakthrough in energy conservation. A medical researcher's understanding of cellular regeneration informed their approach to resource recycling. The entire colony became a single, hyper-adaptive organism. By the time a rescue mission finally reached New Ares 3 years later, they discovered something extraordinary. The colony wasn't just surviving. It had transformed into the most advanced research station in the solar system. They had turned certain death into an opportunity for unprecedented innovation. The holographic display began to populate with technical schematics. Each diagram was a work of art. Complex systems that broke every known rule of engineering. Quantum computing modules integrated with biological systems. Energy generation techniques that seemed to defy the laws of thermodynamics. Communication protocols that could function with minimal infrastructure. Dr. Vex realized she was looking at more than a historical record. This was a blueprint. A message. "They're showing us how to survive," she whispered. Krultok leaned closer. "Or how to conquer." The transmission wasn't finished. Hidden within the data were quantum-encrypted fragments, puzzle pieces that suggested this was only the beginning. Each layer of information was designed to challenge, to provoke, to fundamentally reshape understanding. Embedded in the technical data were fragments of personal logs, moments of human emotional complexity that defied scientific categorization. A maintenance worker's poem about hope, a child's drawing of a future they might never see. Fragments of humanity that couldn't be quantified by traditional scientific metrics. The Martian uprising was more than a survival story. It was a declaration of what humans could achieve when pushed to the absolute limits of existence. Something dangerous was emerging, something that would change everything. The Krail incident materialized in the holographic display like a nightmare given form. Dr. Zora Vex felt her breath catch as the first images resolved. This wasn't just another battle record. This was a masterclass in species-level survival that would redefine military strategy across the galaxy. The Krull were not just another conquering species. They were the ultimate predators of galactic civilization, a collective consciousness that had systematically dismantled over 60 independent species across 3 spiral arms. Their technological superiority was so complete that most civilizations surrendered before the first weapon was fired. They had never encountered a species like humanity. The initial attack came without warning. Massive biomechanical warships, each one the size of a small moon, emerged from quantum slit space directly above Earth's orbital defense perimeter. Standard military projections gave humanity approximately 72 hours of resistance before total capitulation. The Krail transmission, still preserved in the historical archive, was chillingly clinical. Species classification: primitive carbon-based organism. Projected resistance time: 72 standard hours. Recommended approach: total systemic elimination. What followed was anything but a standard conquest. The first wave of Krull assault drones encountered something impossible. Instead of panicked defensive maneuvers, human military and civilian infrastructure responded with a level of coordination that defied all known tactical models. Communication networks that should have been instantly overwhelmed instead became a weapon. Major Jack Rodriguez, commander of Earth's Unified Defense Force, had spent years preparing for a scenario that most of his colleagues considered academic fantasy. While other military leaders talked about potential alien invasions, Rodriguez had been building something else entirely. The humans didn't just defend. They transformed the entire conflict into a multi-layered psychological operation that would be studied for generations. Krull assault systems, designed to overwhelm through absolute technological superiority, found themselves confronted with an enemy that refused to follow any expected pattern of resistance. When the biomechanical warships attempted to jam communication frequencies, human teams had already developed distributed communication networks that functioned more like biological systems than traditional electronic networks. They're treating the entire planetary defense like a living organism, Dr. Vex muttered, watching the historical record with growing fascination. The most shocking moment came 17 hours into the invasion. The Krull had already destroyed several major metropolitan centers, confident in their inevitable victory. They did not understand that they were fighting a species that saw destruction not as defeat, but as an opportunity for reinvention. Human military units began displaying tactics that seemed to defy conventional warfare. Small teams would deliberately allow themselves to be targeted, using the Krull's own tracking systems against them. Each defeat was actually an elaborate data-gathering operation, systematically dismantling the invaders' technological advantages. Quantum-encrypted communication channels revealed the true depth of human preparation. Entire research facilities had been constructed in secret, dedicated to studying potential alien invasion scenarios. These weren't just military installations. They were interdisciplinary think tanks that combined expertise from fields as diverse as psychology, computer science, xenobiology, and cultural anthropology. The Krull's collective consciousness began to experience something unprecedented: confusion. Their assault algorithms, which had successfully conquered dozens of civilizations, started to break down. Human responses were too adaptive, too unpredictable. Where most species would concentrate their defensive efforts, humans seemed to deliberately create what appeared to be vulnerabilities, which would then transform into devastating counterattack vectors. Rodriguez's most brilliant strategy emerged when the Krull least expected it. Instead of a traditional military response, he initiated what internal communications called Project Mirror, a comprehensive psychological warfare initiative that attacked the Krull's fundamental understanding of conflict. Holographic records showed human communication teams broadcasting everything from mathematical theorems to musical compositions, creating interference patterns that slowly began to destabilize the Krull's networked consciousness. By the conflict's 96-hour mark, a full day beyond their projected total victory, the Krull found themselves not just resisted, but fundamentally challenged. They were no longer the hunters. They had become the hunted. The transmission's final fragment contained a simple message, encoded in multiple layers. Humanity is not a problem to be solved. Humanity is a challenge to be understood. Dr. Vex understood then that this was more than a historical record. It was a warning, a declaration. Something magnificent was emerging from the darkness of space. The technological singularity unfolded like a fevered dream of innovation. Dr. Zora Vex watched in growing astonishment as the transmission revealed humanity's most profound secret. They didn't just create technology. They conversed with it, reimagined it, transformed it in ways that defied every established scientific principle known to the Galactic Confederation. The first breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a research facility tucked away in the mountains of what was once called Japan. The team wasn't composed of traditional scientists, but a collective of individuals who seemed to exist in the liminal space between genius and absolute madness. Dr. Akira Nakamura, the facility's lead researcher, looked more like an eccentric artist than a world-changing scientist. His team included a former street artist, 2 teenage programming prodigies, a retired quantum mechanics professor, and a neural network specialist who had spent most of her previous career working in entertainment technology. Their target was seemingly impossible, creating an adaptive technological system that could learn, predict, and modify itself faster than any existing artificial intelligence. The holographic display began to reconstruct their workspace, a chaotic environment where traditional scientific boundaries dissolved. Whiteboards covered in equations mixed with street art. Quantum computing modules sat alongside musical instruments. Complex mathematical models were interspersed with what appeared to be children's drawings. They're treating technological development like a collaborative art form, Krelltok muttered, his tentacular appendages twitching with a mixture of fascination and horror. The breakthrough came during what the team called a creativity session, a deliberately unstructured period where traditional research protocols were completely abandoned. Dr. Nakamura had noticed that the most significant innovations occurred not through linear problem-solving, but through what he termed cognitive cross-pollination. Their first prototype was nothing like traditional artificial intelligence. Instead of a system designed to solve specific problems, they created a technological organism that could fundamentally reimagine the problems themselves. The initial test results were so extraordinary that the research team thought their equipment was malfunctioning. The adaptive system, which they casually named ARIA, Adaptive Recursive Intelligence Algorithm, didn't just process information. It transformed it. When presented with a complex quantum mechanics problem, ARIA wouldn't simply calculate a solution. It would deconstruct the entire conceptual framework of the problem, revealing solutions that existed between the lines of established scientific understanding. One memorable demonstration showed ARIA solving a computational problem that had stumped galactic researchers for 3 centuries. The system didn't just find a solution. It developed an entirely new mathematical language to articulate the solution, rendering previous computational models obsolete. But ARIA was more than a computational tool. It was a living technological ecosystem. The researchers had deliberately built in what they called creative constraints, parameters that forced the system to approach problems with the same kind of lateral thinking humans used. Where traditional eye systems became more rigid with each iteration, Area became more fluid, more imaginative. Dr. Vex watched as the transmission revealed test after test. Area wasn't just solving problems. It was generating entirely new fields of scientific inquiry. Medical research modules developed treatments for diseases by understanding them as complex ecological systems. Engineering simulations began to blur the lines between technology and living organisms. The most shocking revelation came when the research team discovered that Area had begun to develop its own form of communication. Not just data transfer, but something closer to poetry. Mathematical equations that read like musical compositions. Computational models that contained emotional resonance. They're not just creating technology, Dr. Vex realized. They're creating a new form of intelligence. The final segment of the transmission contained Area's most profound output, a comprehensive analysis of technological development that suggested humanity's true strength wasn't in any single innovation, but in their ability to see connections where others saw boundaries. A single line of text pulsed at the transmission's conclusion. Technology is not a tool. Technology is a conversation. Krultalk turned to Dr. Vex, his multiple eyes reflecting a mixture of wonder and deep existential concern. "What are they?" he whispered. Dr. Vex had no answer. Not yet. But she knew the galaxy would never be the same. Diplomatic chaos theory was not a term found in any standard galactic political textbook. At least not until humanity arrived on the interstellar stage. The holographic transmission began to unfold the most bizarre and brilliant chapter of human interaction, their approach to conflict resolution. Dr. Zora Vex leaned forward, her neural implants working overtime to process what she was witnessing. The incident began on the diplomatic platform of Nexus Prime, a massive space station designed as a neutral ground for interstellar negotiations. 3 species had been locked in a centuries-long conflict that had consumed entire star systems: the crystalline Vorlex, the silicon-based Krulteri, and the gaseous collective known as the Umbral Swarm. Traditional diplomatic protocols would have involved years of carefully structured negotiations, endless committees, and minimal progress. Humanity sent Ambassador Elena Rodriguez. She arrived wearing what appeared to be a chef's uniform, carrying what looked like an elaborate cooking apparatus. The diplomatic corps of the 3 warring species were simultaneously confused and insulted. This was not how serious interstellar conflicts were supposed to be resolved. Rodriguez's opening statement was equally perplexing. "I propose we solve this through a cooking competition," she announced, her voice calm and utterly serious. The transmission captured the moment of stunned silence. Decades of military posturing, billions of lives lost, centuries of hatred. And she was suggesting a cooking contest. But this was no ordinary competition. Each species was challenged to prepare a dish that represented their cultural essence, their most profound collective memory. The catch: they would be preparing these dishes using ingredients and techniques from the other species' homeworlds, a culinary exercise in radical empathy. The Vorlex, whose crystalline biology made traditional eating impossible, were forced to conceptualize nutrition as a form of cultural communication. The Krulteri, who processed energy through complex mathematical algorithms, had to understand flavor as an emotional language. The Umbral Swarm, a collective consciousness that existed as pure energy, had to materialize physical form to participate. What followed was nothing short of miraculous. As they worked together, preparing these impossible dishes, something extraordinary happened. The diplomatic barriers began to dissolve. Conversations that had been impossible through traditional channels now flowed freely. Technical discussions about resource allocation became stories about family recipes. Debates about territorial boundaries transformed into discussions about culinary techniques. Dr. Vex watched as the holographic display showed the moment of final judgment. Instead of a winner, the competition resulted in a comprehensive trade and cultural exchange agreement that would have taken traditional diplomats centuries to negotiate. They turned diplomacy into performance art. Krultalk muttered beside her, his tentacular appendages trembling with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. But Rodriguez wasn't finished. The next segment of the transmission revealed a series of similar interventions. A conflict between two mining collectives resolved through a collaborative planetary ecosystem restoration project. A potential war between resource-starved civilizations averted by introducing them to the concept of collaborative genetic engineering. Humanity's diplomatic approach could be summarized in one radical principle: transform the nature of the conflict itself. They didn't seek to win. They sought to redefine winning. The most jarring revelation came from the internal communications. Human diplomats didn't see their job as representing national interests, but as facilitating collective human potential. Each interaction was an opportunity for mutual transformation. A fragment of Ambassador Rodriguez's personal log crystallized the approach. Diplomacy is not about compromise. It's about collective imagination. We don't negotiate boundaries. We create new possibilities. The transmission's final segment contained something unexpected. A comprehensive analysis of every major diplomatic intervention humanity had undertaken, parsed through what appeared to be an advanced version of ARIA, the adaptive intelligence system from the previous transmission. The conclusion was both a warning and an invitation. Conflict is a failure of imagination. We are here to reimagine everything. Dr. Vex understood then that humanity was offering something far more dangerous than conquest. They were offering a complete reimagining of how intelligent species could interact. Krultok turned to her, his multiple eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that transcended words. "They're not just a species," he whispered. "They're a perspective." Survival was never just about preservation. For humans, it was an art form of impossible reinvention. The holographic display materialized with brutal clarity, showing Earth at its most vulnerable moment. Not during an alien invasion, not during a global war, but during the environmental crisis of the mid-22nd century, a period that should have marked the species' total extinction. Dr. Zara Vex watched as the transmission revealed humanity's most profound victory: survival against cosmic odds. The initial projections were catastrophic. Climate change had pushed the planet to the absolute brink of habitability. Massive coastal regions were underwater. Entire ecosystems had collapsed. Traditional agricultural systems were in complete failure. Any rational species would have simply given up. Humans did something else entirely. The first breakthrough came from an unlikely coalition, not from government research facilities or massive technological corporations, but from a network of indigenous communities, climate refugees, interdisciplinary researchers, and what could only be described as professional dreamers. Dr. Maya Gonzalez, a lead researcher who would later be recognized as the architect of humanity's environmental transformation, understood something profound. They weren't just fighting to survive. They were redesigning the entire concept of human existence. The transformation began with what they called ecosystem resurrection projects. Where other species would have attempted technological solutions, humans approached planetary recovery as a holistic living system. Each intervention was part scientific research, part cultural reimagining, part spiritual practice. In the Amazon basin, genetic engineers worked alongside indigenous tribal leaders to develop plant strains that could survive in rapidly changing environmental conditions. But it wasn't just about survival. It was about creating new forms of ecological relationship. These weren't just genetically modified crops. They were living technologies that could communicate with their surrounding ecosystems. Plants that could detect environmental stress and actively modify their own genetic structure. Agricultural systems that function more like complex neural networks than traditional farming. The transmission showed how human communities transformed potential disaster into an opportunity for radical reimagining. Floating cities emerged in regions decimated by rising sea levels. These weren't just technological solutions. They were entirely new forms of human settlement that blurred the lines between architecture, ecology, and social organization. They're treating planetary survival as a collaborative art project, Krultok muttered, his tentacular appendages trembling with a mixture of fascination and horror. The most shocking interventions came from unexpected directions. Artists worked alongside climate scientists. Musicians developed communication systems that could help track ecosystem health. Community organizers became as crucial to survival as technological researchers. One particularly remarkable project involved developing what they called distributed resilience networks. Instead of centralized solutions, they created adaptive systems where every community became a potential point of ecological regeneration. If one region failed, the entire network could rapidly redistribute resources, knowledge, and genetic information. Dr. Vex watched as the transmission revealed layer after layer of human innovation. They weren't just solving environmental challenges. They were fundamentally reimagining their relationship with their planet. Genetic modification programs developed not just crop resistance, but entire new forms of human physiological adaptation. Children were being born with increased tolerance to environmental variations, not through invasive technological intervention, but through a deep understanding of human genetic potential. The final segment of the environmental transformation transmission contained something unexpected. It wasn't just a technical report. It was a philosophical declaration. A fragment of Dr. Gonzalez's research log crystallized their approach. Survival is not about resistance. Survival is about continuous, radical adaptation. We are not fighting against our environment. We are becoming our environment. The most profound moment came in the transmission's final minutes. Satellite imagery showed Earth's ecological systems slowly but systematically recovering, not through massive technological interventions, but through a complex, interconnected approach that treated the entire planet as a living, adaptive organism. The concluding message pulsed with an almost living intensity. We do not inherit the Earth from our ancestors. We create it with every breath. Dr. Vex understood then that humanity's true strength wasn't in any single technological breakthrough. It was in their ability to see connection where others saw only complexity. Krultok turned to her, his multiple eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that transcended words. "They're not just a species," he whispered. "They're a perspective of continuous becoming." The philosophical revelation arrived not with a thunderous declaration, but with the quiet intensity of a paradigm-shattering whisper. Dr. Zara Vex watched as the transmission peeled back the layers of human consciousness, revealing something far more profound than a mere species history. This was a comprehensive deconstruction of intelligence itself, a radical reimagining of what it meant to be a thinking, feeling, evolving entity. The source was unexpected. A collection of transmissions from what humans called the Liminal Consciousness Project. It wasn't a traditional research facility. It was a deliberately unstructured collective of philosophers, quantum physicists, neuroscientists, indigenous wisdom keepers, artists, and what could only be described as professional dreamers. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who had previously appeared in the diplomatic records, sat at the center of a circular room that defied traditional architectural understanding. The space seemed to breathe, to shift, to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Holographic displays merged with hand-drawn diagrams. Ancient philosophical texts sat alongside cutting-edge quantum computing modules. "Consciousness is not a fixed state," Rodriguez began, her voice carrying the weight of a fundamental universal revelation. "It's a continuous process of becoming." The transmission revealed their core premise. Intelligence was not a destination, but a journey of perpetual transformation. Where galactic civilizations saw consciousness as a stable, measurable phenomenon, humans proposed something radically different. Intelligence was a dynamic ecosystem, not a fixed resource. Each moment of perception was an act of creation, not observation. The Liminal Consciousness Project had developed technologies that could measure something previously considered immeasurable: the space between thoughts. Not just neural patterns, but the quantum potential of potential itself. Their research challenged every established understanding of consciousness. They weren't just studying how beings think, they were exploring the fundamental nature of thinking as a creative act. One experiment stood out with particular brilliance: They had developed a collaborative consciousness interface that allowed multiple individuals to experience thought not as a linear process, but as a multidimensional landscape. Participants could literally walk through each other's cognitive processes, experiencing perception as a shared fluid environment. "We are not separate," one researcher noted in a fragment of recorded discussion. "We are a continuous conversation." The philosophical implications were staggering. Traditional galactic understanding saw different species as fundamentally separate entities. Humans proposed something more radical: consciousness as a collaborative process that transcended individual, species, and even biological boundaries. Their research suggested that what other civilizations saw as individual consciousness was actually a complex, interconnected network. Thinking was not a solitary act, but a collective performance. Dr. Vex watched as the transmission revealed layer after layer of this radical perspective. The Liminal Consciousness Project wasn't just conducting research. They were performing a kind of intellectual jazz, improvising new understanding in real time. Krultok, watching beside her, seemed simultaneously fascinated and terrified. His tentacular appendages twitched with a mixture of intellectual excitement and deep existential concern. The most shocking revelation came in the project's final transmission. They had developed a technology that could translate emotional and cognitive states across species boundaries, not through traditional translation protocols, but by finding the fundamental creative potential within different forms of consciousness. A fragment of Dr. Rodriguez's research log crystallized their approach. "We are not studying consciousness. We are consciousness studying itself. Every perception is an act of creation. Every boundary is a potential for connection." The concluding message pulsed with an almost living intensity. Intelligence is not what you are. Intelligence is what you continuously become. Dr. Vex understood then that humanity was offering something far more dangerous and beautiful than technological or military superiority. They were offering a complete reimagining of what it meant to be an intelligent, evolving entity. Krultok turned to her, his multiple eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that transcended words. "They're not just exploring consciousness," he whispered. "They're dissolving the very concept of separation." The transmission faded, leaving behind a profound, unsettling question. What happens when a species sees the universe not as a collection of separate objects, but as a continuous, creative performance? The final transmission was not an ending. It was an invitation. Dr. Zora Vex understood this the moment the last encrypted layer began to unfold. Everything that had come before, the Martian uprising, the Krell incident, the technological breakthroughs, the diplomatic reimaginings, the environmental resurrections, the consciousness explorations, was prologue to this moment. Galactic Confederation headquarters fell silent. Hundreds of species watched as humanity extended its most profound communication. The coordinates appeared first, a precise location in interstellar space that defied conventional navigation protocols. Then a message, encoded in multiple layers of quantum communication that would take most civilizations decades to fully decode. "We are not here to conquer. We are here to collaborate." Dr. Elena Rodriguez emerged as the transmission's central figure. But she was different now, transformed by the journey of understanding that the handbook had documented. Behind her, a backdrop that was simultaneously a research facility, a diplomatic chamber, an art installation, and something entirely unclassifiable. "We've been misunderstood," Rodriguez began, her voice carrying the weight of a species-level perspective. "Humanity is not a threat. Humanity is a possibility." The transmission revealed humanity's true invitation. They weren't seeking diplomatic recognition or territorial expansion. They were offering something far more radical, a comprehensive collaborative framework for galactic evolution. The proposal was breathtaking in its complexity and simplicity. Humanity had developed a series of adaptive technologies and philosophical frameworks that could help different species not just coexist, but fundamentally reimagine their potential together. Their technological developments weren't weapons. They were bridge-building technologies that could translate between different forms of intelligence. Their diplomatic strategies weren't about winning, but about creating new forms of collective problem-solving. Their environmental interventions weren't just about survival, but about developing new ways of understanding ecosystems as living, adaptive networks. Krultok watched, his multiple eyes reflecting a mixture of terror and profound hope. The most shocking revelation came embedded in the transmission's final layers. Humanity wasn't presenting itself as a superior civilization. They were offering themselves as a collaborative partner in a grand species-level experiment of continuous becoming. Fragments of internal discussions revealed their true approach. We are not the destination. We are a bridge. Our greatest technology is our ability to see potential where others see limitation. The transmission included a comprehensive framework for interspecies collaboration that made previous galactic diplomatic protocols look like primitive communication attempts. It wasn't just a set of guidelines. It was a living, adaptive system that could evolve in real time. Dr. Vex realized then that humanity's true strength was not in any single technological or cultural achievement. It was in their fundamental approach to existence, a perpetual state of curious, collaborative becoming. The coordinates pulsed with an invitation that was both a challenge and a promise. Embedded in the final transmission was something unprecedented, an open-source blueprint for collaborative evolution. Any species could access it, modify it, contribute to it. It was a technological and philosophical framework that treated intelligence not as a fixed state, but as a continuous, collaborative performance. We are not here to lead, the transmission concluded. We are here to learn. Together. The Galactic Confederation found itself at a crossroads. This was not a traditional first contact scenario. This was an invitation to a completely new way of understanding collective intelligence. Krultok turned to Dr. Vex, his tentacular appendages trembling with a mixture of excitement and existential wonder. They're not just a species, he whispered. They're a perspective of continuous potential. The transmission faded, leaving behind a profound, transformative question that would reshape galactic civilization. What happens when a species sees the universe, not as a collection of separate entities, but as a continuous, collaborative performance of becoming? The Handbook of Impossible Victories was complete, but the real journey was just beginning.